everybody, and welcome to the South Asia Union Summit led by women. And if you're watching since the time that it started a few hours ago, I'm really happy to have you here. And if you've just joined in, then my very warm welcome to you all. I'm Ekta Kapoor. I'm the founder of Ishi and South Asia Union. And I'm honored to introduce our speaker for this session, Karen Lee Downs. Hello, Karen.
Hey, great to see you. Great to be with everyone.
Thank you so much for being here. For our everybody who's watching, Karen is the founder and the managing director of FemmeQ, an international movement committed to creating new paradigms of thinking and acting in core sectors of society using feminine intelligence. She's also the founder of the Flourish Initiative, where she brings her expertise and hands on experience to transform outdated organizational systems into those that enable human flourishing and business prosperity. As a leadership consultant, she has designed development programs in global corporates such as Molton Brown, Intel, BP, Unilever, and Virgin Atlantic, among many others. Earlier, she had co founded and built an $8.5 million alternative healthcare enterprise in Australia, and she went on to support five successful international startups. Now shuttling between UK, USA, and Costa Rica, Karen supports civil society organizations in India and Bangladesh to transform entrenched cultural norms. A serious road cyclist who competed in the World Masters, Karen has authored 6 books on well being that have sold over 500,000 copies. Today, Karen is going to speak about feminine intelligence as embodied leadership. So, thank you for being here, Karen. And now I will hand over to you and please tell us about this concept.
Thank you so much, Ekta. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. And it's such an important time in our world to have these conferences, to have these online opportunities to be together and to learn from one another. So today, I'm going to be doing the speaking, but I know in your lives that there's always times that you need to speak, you need to find your voice, and you need to stand. Stand for what you believe in and stand up for who you are and what you bring into the world. And that's really why I think the topic today and why I've called it Feminine Intelligence as Embodied Leadership, because I think that we women have for decades followed the old models of leadership that men and the patriarchal system has led us into. And in fact, many examples that I've seen in corporate is that in order to succeed, women follow the masculine tendencies of competition, being assertive, operating from a scarcity model, often around money and opportunity. And they end up competing with one another versus supporting one another. And I think that these times are calling for something different. We're calling, during the pandemic, we all know that the pandemic has affected women all over the world disproportionately in terms of the crises and the impact we felt financially. We felt it economically and financially, and we felt it in our personal lives, and we felt it in our business lives, in our professions. So I think for me today, it's such a pleasure to be with you all because of this, the importance of what Ekta is bringing in and highlighting and showcasing over these days, that we can talk about these subjects. And whilst we are talking about, or women are presenting, the topic I wish to talk about today is FemmeQ. So I want to really cover 4 points in the time that I have with you all. So one is, why is this topic important? 2, what we can do, or what it's about and what we can do about it. How do we implement this notion of embodied leadership, and what if we do? So 4 important questions we always want to know. If we're going to embark on learning, we're going to embark on a new practice, we want to know in the end what it will do for us. So my own experience, as Ekta read out earlier, or spoke about earlier, is back in the day in the 80s. I want to start with why this conversation and why this topic is important to me, and why I call or speak about feminine intelligence as an embodied leadership principle. So pretty much what I had been taught in growing up is that if I used my head, I used my smarts, I used my intellect, then I would get ahead and I would succeed. But very soon, when I realized that I decided not to go into university and left high school, not even completing my final year, I realized in a world that was filled with academics and university degrees, I wasn't sure how I was going to survive. But what I was passionate about was well-being. And so I trained as an aerobic instructor. So from my very early days, I started in the inquiry, the experiment, and the discovery of what our intelligences are in our body. So firstly, I actually discovered through my training as an aerobic instructor that my body had a wisdom. My body knew what to do when I asked it to do what it needed to do. And I listened to my body, and I in turn studied nutrition, aromatherapy, and a multitude of alternative healthcare practices. To mention that I built a multi-million-dollar business based on these practices. And what sat behind this training in the physical world was my craving to understand and have a better sense of the meaning of my life and the purpose to my life. And so I studied anthroposophy, which is the spiritual science that Rudolf Steiner brought into the world and he died in 1923 and had written hundreds and given thousands of lectures on this topic of the understanding of the human being. So my spiritual studies combined with my physical, my emotional and my mental applications or aptitudes became a resource for me that I saw was far more than using my head, as I'd been told when I was young, if I learned and got educated. But I learned about my body's wisdom, and that's what I want to speak about today. So why is this important? Is that for decades, we have undermined the feminine intelligence, the feminine understanding and relationship to our bodies. Ekta mentioned also that I've worked in India and Bangladesh for many years. I worked with an organization called the Hunger Project. And so I have an understanding that when I speak about our organization, FemmeQ, Feminine Intelligence, that I have an understanding that that's often an inappropriate conversation to have, or not necessary, or irrelevant in countries or in context and in cultures like I experienced in India on the ground in villages. Because what we need to talk about is biology, gender, and inequalities, the policies and structures that need to be in place to bring about a more just and humane society. So feminine intelligence is something that we have the privilege of talking about when we're not under duress, and which is why I've coupled the topic of embodied leadership, because often when our bodies are in survival or reaction, we lose our feminine intelligence. So I want to speak about the combination of those two today. Why this is important is because during the pandemic, I mentioned that women have been disproportionately impacted through homeschooling, girls leaving school and having to go back to their villages or to their homes, people losing their jobs. So there's an incredible amount of loss that's been experienced around the world, no matter what culture or country you live in. And when we have this experience of loss over a long period of time, what can happen is we can no longer make sense of the world. When we can't be with the people we love, we can lose our sense of belonging. Many people have lost their jobs, their identity, their finances, as I mentioned earlier. So if we can come back for a moment to what the body tells us when we're not in survival, because often at the moment we find people's nervous systems, or I've certainly seen people's nervous systems highly activated because they have lost their ability to navigate or have a compass that actually takes them through the world in a way that makes sense to them. So many people who are online today will have seen that there's been during this time, a huge recognition of trauma. And Ekta and I Ekta joined me in a FemmeQ gathering that that I hosted from Costa Rica some months ago. And Ikta pointed to the terror that exists when we as women go out into the world, or we go into business and we're humiliated, or we're denigrated, or we're marginalized because of our gender. So what's important is that we come back to our bodies and reconnect to the wisdom of our bodies. So I want to touch on what we can do about this situation when we're dealing with multiple crises and an unknown future. Because more important than ever before, we have to be able to listen to something other than our heads, other than the mind that circulates often negative conversations or negative voices in our head. And what we need to come back into is the wisdom of our bodies. And I call this feminine intelligence. And we started FemmeQ in 2015 to really bring about this, this new invitation beyond emotional intelligence. Was what does the feminine hold in their biology in the body? So pausing for a moment to think about your biology, science has now proven, depending on whether you're born into whatever gender you're born into what body you're born into, has a certain consciousness to it. Scientists have now proven this. So due to your culture, your biology, and your life's experiences, you'll be orientated to receiving information and responding to circumstances in a particular way. When we're children, if we don't have our needs met, then we have a reaction, or we are trying to seek those out as adults. But if we tap into an innate intelligence in our body and in the gender, if you regard yourself or as the pronoun she, her, in particular, the body of a woman has certain intelligence in it. Our bodies operate in cycles related to the moon. That is a particular intelligence that our body, it's a mystery. And that cycle that that we operate, that we don't talk about in public, is important for us to recognize. It's a certain sort of intelligence that our body has. Also, science has now proven that the gut and the heart feeds the brain with more information than what the brain itself holds. Our brain is only an interpreter. So more and more we need to cultivate what I call the feminine intelligence of embodied wisdom, listening to our body's reaction, the visceral reaction we have to life, and also to the experiences we have. And sometimes that's activated through trauma. But if we can self-regulate our nervous system, understanding that it was a trigger point and a reaction to either a conflict or a crisis, or to humiliation, or a response to circumstances we're facing as leaders, and we can self-regulate with breath. We can self-regulate by taking a moment of silence, listening to our gut, that like our intuition, listening to our heart and the resonance and rhythm of our heart, and then feeding it back to the brain. Now, the other part that I want to include in the embodied aspect of our leadership is the left and right hemispheres of the brain. All of these organs, all of these functions of our system are so important to cultivate in terms of our own self-awareness and the understanding of the resources and faculties we have at our fingertips. So the left brain has access to language. The right brain, the left brain is also rational, logical, and transactional. We need that critically to be in business and to get things done. But what has been overplayed for decades, if not centuries, is that aspect of the left brain. If anyone's interested, Ian McGilchrist's book called The Master and His Emissary is an excellent book to say that the left brain has become the master and the right brain the emissary, the in service to. And in fact, it should be the other way around. The right brain, which is far more where women and the feminine is far more connected, is relational. It thinks in pictures, it imagines, it's very visual. So we use our imagination when we have moments of silence. We get connected to our bodies, and then we send it over to the left brain to make sense of it and to speak about what's important to us. Now, many, I'm sure, like me, you will have found yourself in a meeting where you feel tongue-tied because there's so much intellect and left brain in strategy, in KPIs, in performance measurements, etc., in business, when the left brain is predominant in the conversation. And we don't have a moment just to sit and pause and say, how do I feel about this decision? What are the impacts of this decision on my children? This is feminine intelligence, where we think from the whole, we think of the wider impact in the family, and we think of the wider impact in the community and the impact on now our environment. This is critical for this time. This intelligence is feminine intelligence and embodied leadership, because what's been taken from us is this sense of being able to have silence and pause and be quiet and listen to the future that is speaking to us. How can we listen to the future if we're so contentious and in conflict with the present moment? So overwhelmed with surviving the present circumstances and the crises and the news and the media that we hear about every day. So we need moments of silence to come back to our bodies. Our breath is access to that, and our bodies bring us present into the present moment. So I really want to encourage people to, these points I want to leave you with are: one, develop self-awareness and notice where you're triggered, notice what your reactions are. Is it a reaction or a response? Two, to understand the difference between the right and the left hemispheres, and how can you develop more of the creative side of your brain, the much more relational and creative and innovative side of the brain, where we have time out to paint or draw or listen to poetry and music and to dance, things that are in the creative realm. Also, the third one is to notice that what it takes to discipline ourselves to develop these qualities. It's 3,000 times, it's said in science, it's 3,000 times to become efficient at something we need to practice. It's 30,000 to become masterful. So we have to return to the feminine. We have to be masters of our own destiny and our rights, to speak from the feminine, to notice our wisdom in our bodies. And that's going to take some practice. So I encourage you to join me. And I will say that these practices that I talk about, I teach online in the 12 Virtues program that I do online. So we talk about compassionate leadership, but how do we develop self-compassion without practice? How do we develop compassion for others without deeply understanding that what that means in our bodies and where we feel it? How do we understand devotion, not from self-sacrifice, but a way to use devotion to commit ourselves to the things that matter most to us? So these 12 virtues I've developed from my spiritual work and my everyday practice as a business coach and leader. And I know that these virtues, these 12 virtues that we embark on over 12 weeks, is actually the way that we can start to embody these qualities that we so value when we're the best of ourselves. So I see you've returned and to join me, so I want to pause there. I hope that's been helpful today.
Yes, of course. And in fact, I loved a few points that you'd made, about your spiritual studies became a resource for you as much as your mental faculties, your knowledge, and your intellect. And then now you've, of course, incorporated the new paradigm in in the FemmeQ concept. And also you talked about how for decades, and I would say, for a very long time, actually, we have undermined our relationship to our bodies. And the body has a certain consciousness to it, which we have we've completely forgotten about it. And, we're now out of touch with it. So, yeah, so these are really important points that you've made. And I'm so glad that you've brought up these issues. And I do really hope that more people take on these issues, and they understand how they have to activate the feminine intelligence in them to take wiser decisions in the real world. It's not always about the head, it's also about the heart. And so, to like you said, it's a practice, so one has to keep practicing it, and that's how you get it right.
I
um,
think the thing I just want to finish also with what you've just said, Ikta, is so
yeah.
important that the denial that we women have had about our bodies. I was watching a woman breastfeed in a public forum, in a public meeting place the other day, and I was
Mm,
just so touched by the miracle that that is. You know, that we don't stop and say, my body is a miracle, that it
absolutely.
produces what it does and it's in touch and it provides. A woman's body is so amazing
It
and we need
is.
to listen to it. Mm,
Absolutely.
mm,
That's amazing. That I think that's a point when we actually realize what miracles we are. I think we're able to have so much more gratitude for the rest of the universe as well, and for the rest of the blessings we have, which we may otherwise take for granted. So,
exactly.
thank you so much, Karen. There's so much on this subject that we can talk. But as you know, we have our summit going on, and we have one session after the other.
Of course.
So yeah, we have to head over now for the next one, which begins in 8 minutes. So to everybody who's around, please do stay on, and I hope to see you again soon, and to have more meaningful discussions on the subject of feminine intelligence. Karen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ita. Thank you so much.